What if everything you thought you knew about buried treasure was wrong? What if the greatest mystery in North America wasn't hidden by pirates or smugglers, but by people with knowledge so dangerous they built an engineering masterpiece to protect it? In 1795, a teenage boy named Daniel McGinnis saw mysterious lights flickering on a deserted island off the coast of Nova Scotia. The next day, he discovered a circular depression in the ground beneath an ancient oak tree, with a ship's pulley hanging from its branches. When he started digging, he found wooden platforms every 10 feet, descending into darkness. But at 90 feet, he triggered something terrifying, a flood trap so sophisticated that it still works perfectly over 200 years later. 6 people have died trying to reach the bottom. Millions of dollars have been lost. And after 2 centuries of excavation, using everything from shovels to ground-penetrating radar, nobody knows what's really buried there. Welcome to Oak Island, where the treasure isn't gold or silver, it might be something far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous. This is the story of the world's longest treasure hunt and why some secrets refuse to be found. The night of June 14, 1795, was unnaturally still. Daniel McGinnis couldn't sleep. At 16 years old, he'd lived his entire life in Chester, Nova Scotia, where silence was normal. But tonight felt different. The air hung heavy, thick with moisture from Mahon Bay through his bedroom window. He watched the mainland coastline fade into darkness as the last fishing boats returned home. Then he saw it. A light, flickering orange against the black void of Oak Island. The island sat less than 200 yards offshore, close enough to reach by rowboat in 10 minutes. Yet nobody lived there. The land was worthless. Rocky soil, dense forest, no fresh water. Fishermen sometimes used the beaches to dry their nets, but nobody stayed after sunset. So what was that light? Daniel pressed his face against the cold glass. The light moved, not randomly, like a lantern swinging in wind. This movement was deliberate, methodical. Someone was walking across the island's eastern end, carrying a torch, back and forth in straight lines, as if searching for something, or marking something. He watched for nearly an hour. The light appeared and disappeared between trees, following what seemed to be a grid pattern. Whoever carried that torch was conducting a systematic survey. Then, around midnight, the light vanished completely. No gradual dimming. No slow retreat toward a boat. Just gone, as if swallowed by the earth itself. Daniel lay awake until dawn, mind racing with possibilities. Smugglers, perhaps. Mahone Bay was perfect for illegal trade. British authorities patrolled Halifax harbour strictly, but these outer islands offered dozens of hidden coves. French ships, American traders, Caribbean rum runners, all of them used Oak Island occasionally. But they came and went quickly. They didn't spend hours with torches in the middle of the night. By sunrise, Daniel had made his decision. He would row to Oak Island that morning and investigate. His parents wouldn't miss him. Farm chores could wait a few hours. This mystery was too intriguing to ignore. He grabbed bread and cheese from the kitchen, filled a water flask, and headed to the beach where his small rowboat waited. The crossing took 12 minutes. Daniel rowed steadily, watching Oak Island grow larger. The island stretched about a mile long and half a mile wide, shaped like an irregular crescent. Dense oak and spruce trees covered most of the interior. Only the beaches offered clear ground. He aimed for the eastern shore, where he'd seen last night's light. The boat scraped onto pebbles. Daniel dragged it above the tide line and secured it. The morning sun barely penetrated the forest canopy. Shadows stretched everywhere, making the woods feel deeper and darker than they actually were. He walked inland, pushing through underbrush, looking for anything unusual. 15 minutes of searching revealed nothing, just trees, rocks, and the occasional bird call. Daniel was about to give up when he entered a small clearing. His boot caught on something, nearly tripping him. He looked down. A depression in the ground, circular, about 13 feet across. The center had sunk several inches below the surrounding soil, but the depression wasn't what made Daniel's heart race. It was the tree. A massive red oak stood at the depression's edge, its lowest branch extending directly over the sunken ground. And from that branch hung something that didn't belong. A ship's tackle block. Old, weathered, covered in rust. The kind sailors used to hoist heavy cargo from ship holds. Daniel knelt beside the depression and touched the soil. Soft, recently disturbed, though vegetation had begun reclaiming the surface. He dug his fingers deeper. The dirt came up easily, too easily. This wasn't compact forest floor. Someone had excavated this spot, then filled it back in. But when? The tackle block looked decades old, suggesting this excavation happened long ago. Yet the soil hadn't fully settled, indicating something beneath was still shifting, still compacting downward. He stood and examined the oak tree more carefully. The branch holding the tackle block showed deep grooves where rope had cut into the wood over many years. Heavy rope, the kind needed to lift enormous weight. And the branch's position, directly above the depression's center, couldn't be coincidence. Someone had used this tree as a crane. They'd suspended something over this spot and lowered it into the ground. Daniel's imagination exploded. Treasure. It had to be treasure. Everyone knew the stories. Pirates had terrorized these waters for a century. Captain Kidd, the most notorious of them all, had sailed through Mahone Bay. Some said he'd hidden his accumulated plunder somewhere, along the Nova Scotia coast before his capture in 1699. What if this was it? What if Kidd, or another pirate, had buried their fortune right here beneath this innocent-looking depression? But even as excitement flooded through him, questions emerged. If pirates buried treasure here, why go to such elaborate effort? The tackle block suggested they'd lowered something extremely heavy. The depression's size indicated a large excavation. Pirates were practical men. They buried their treasure quickly and left. They didn't construct elaborate sites with tree-mounted pulley systems. So who did this? And what did they bury that required such preparation? Daniel circled the clearing, looking for other clues. He found them. Vegetation patterns were wrong. Young trees grew in unnaturally straight lines, as if planted to hide something. The undergrowth looked deliberately maintained, not wild. And near the depression's edge, partially buried under decades of leaves, he found fragments. Pieces of wood, hand-hewn timber, not natural branches. Someone had cut these boards with saws, shaped them with tools. The sun climbed higher. Daniel realized he'd been on the island for over 2 hours. His parents would notice his absence soon. He needed to return home. But he couldn't stop thinking about that depression, about the tackle block, about what might lie beneath those several inches of sunken soil. He made a decision that would alter his life and launch a mystery lasting centuries. He would tell his 2 best friends, John Smith and Anthony Vaughan, about this discovery. Together, they would return to Oak Island with shovels. They would dig. They would uncover whatever lay beneath that depression. And if treasure waited down there, they would split it 3 ways and become the wealthiest young men in Nova Scotia. Daniel returned to his boat, took one last look at the clearing, and began rowing home. He didn't notice the figure watching from deeper in the forest. An old man, face weathered by decades of sun and salt. The man had been on Oak Island that night, carrying the torch Daniel saw. He'd been checking something, making sure certain markers remained undisturbed, making sure the secret stayed buried. The old man watched Daniel's boat disappear toward the mainland. He sighed deeply. After all these years, someone had finally noticed. Someone young, curious, and foolish enough to investigate. The old man had known this day would come eventually. You couldn't hide something this significant forever. Eventually, someone would dig, and when they did, they would discover that Oak Island's secret was far more dangerous than any pirate treasure. He turned and walked toward the island's opposite shore, where his own boat waited. He needed to send word, to tell them that the hiding place had been discovered, that after 90 years of safety, the plan was compromised. They would decide what to do next, whether to intervene or whether to let events unfold naturally. Either way, the boy who'd just left this island had no idea what he'd stumbled upon. No idea that his discovery would consume his life, destroy dozens of fortunes, and kill at least 6 people before the truth finally emerged, if it ever emerged at all. 3 days later, on June 17, 1795, Daniel McGuinness returned to Oak Island. John Smith and Anthony Vaughan came with him. They brought 3 shovels, rope, a bucket, and enough food for a full day's work. The 3 teenage boys stood around the depression, staring at the sunken ground that promised fortune and adventure. Daniel took the first shovel and drove it into the soft earth. The blades sank easily. He lifted the soil and tossed it aside. John and Anthony joined him. Within minutes, they'd established a rhythm. Dig, lift, toss. Dig, lift, toss. The depression began deepening. 2 feet down, they hit the first layer. Flagstones, large, flat stones that didn't occur naturally in this soil. Someone had placed them here deliberately, creating a seal over whatever lay below. The boys removed the stones carefully, stacking them beside their growing excavation. Beneath the flagstones, the shaft continued downward, and the walls, they now noticed, weren't random earth. They were smooth, circular, cut with tools. Someone had dug this hole, recently enough that the walls hadn't collapsed, but long enough ago that forest had reclaimed the surface. The boys looked at each other, excitement building. If someone went to this much trouble, the treasure must be extraordinary. They kept digging. 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. At 10 feet deep, their shovels struck wood. Oak logs, each about 10 inches in diameter, laid across the shaft like a platform. The wood was old but solid, deliberately placed to create a barrier. Why? To support something above, to protect something below, to slow down anyone who dug here. The boys didn't care. They removed the logs one by one and continued excavating. The shaft descended into darkness. At 20 feet, another platform. Identical oak logs, same size, same arrangement. At 30 feet, another platform. The pattern was clear. Someone had constructed this shaft with multiple barriers, each one requiring hours of labor to install. As afternoon faded toward evening, the boys made a crucial realization. This excavation was too deep for 3 teenagers with basic tools. They needed equipment. Pulleys, stronger rope, more workers. They needed money, and that meant telling adults. That meant sharing their secret. That meant dividing any treasure they found among more people. Daniel looked at his two friends. Their faces were covered in dirt, their hands blistered, their clothes soaked with sweat. They'd dug 30 feet in one day and found only more mystery. How deep did this shaft go? What waited at the bottom? And why did someone go to such extreme effort to hide it? The boys refilled the shaft temporarily and marked its location. They would return. But first, they needed help. Serious help. From people with resources and experience. People who understood that something extraordinary was buried on Oak Island. Something that someone, somewhere, had desperately wanted to remain hidden. 8 years passed before serious excavation resumed. Daniel McGuinness, now 24, had spent those years trying to convince investors that Oak Island held something valuable. Most laughed at him. A teenager's fantasy. Pirates didn't bury treasure. That was children's literature, not reality. But in 1803, a businessman named Simeon Linz finally listened. Linz had heard rumors about Oak Island for years. Old fishermen told stories about mysterious lights on the island decades earlier. About boats anchoring in hidden coves at midnight. About men with torches digging furiously, then disappearing before dawn. These weren't recent events. They'd happened in the 1760s, perhaps earlier, which meant whatever was buried had been there for at least 40 years, possibly much longer. Linz formed the Onslow Company, recruited experienced miners, and returned to Oak Island with proper equipment. The original excavation had filled with debris over 8 years, but the location was clear. That depression beneath the oak tree, that mysterious shaft with its wooden platforms every 10 feet. They would dig until they reached the bottom, no matter how deep it went. The work began in early summer. The miners cleared the shaft quickly, removing years of accumulated dirt and collapsed sections. By August, they'd passed the 30-foot depth where McGuinness and his friends had stopped. The pattern continued. Every 10 feet, another platform of oak logs. 40 feet, 50 feet, 60 feet. Each barrier identical. Each one precisely engineered. The miners noticed something disturbing. The platforms weren't just oak logs. Between some layers, they found other materials. Putty, charcoal, coconut fiber. The putty was ship's caulking, used to seal wooden holes. The charcoal suggested deliberate burning, perhaps to create a waterproof layer. But the coconut fiber was impossible. Coconuts didn't grow anywhere near Nova Scotia. The nearest coconut palms were 1,500 miles south in the Caribbean. Someone had transported coconut fiber from the Caribbean to Nova Scotia. Why coconut? Fiber was commonly used in tropical regions for rope and waterproofing. Ships carried it as cargo material. But why bury it on Oak Island, unless whoever dug this shaft came from the Caribbean? Unless they were using materials familiar to them, unless this excavation was connected to Caribbean trade routes, pirate operations, or colonial shipping. The miners dug deeper, 70 feet, 80 feet. The shaft remained perfectly circular, its walls showing clear tool marks, pickaxes, shovels, perhaps specialized mining equipment. Whoever dug this had experience. They understood excavation, structural support, and underground construction. This wasn't amateur work. This was professional engineering. At 90 feet, they found something that changed everything. A large stone, roughly 3 feet long and 16 inches wide, carefully placed across the shaft. The stone's surface was covered in markings. symbols, characters that nobody recognized. The miners extracted it carefully and brought it to the surface. Simeon Linz examined the stone for hours. The symbols were deliberately carved, not natural erosion. They formed patterns, possibly language. Some characters resembled letters from European alphabets. Others looked completely foreign. A few might be numbers. Was this a message? A warning? A key to understanding what lay below? The stone generated enormous excitement. Newspapers in Halifax published descriptions. Scholars examined drawings of the symbols. Various people proposed translations, though none were confirmed. One interpretation, promoted decades later by a language professor, claimed the inscription read, 40 feet below, £2 million are buried. £2 million sterling. An unimaginable fortune in 1803, equivalent to billions today. Whether that translation was accurate remains disputed. The stone itself disappeared in the early 1900s, lost or deliberately hidden. But in 1803, it proved that intelligent beings had created this shaft, that they'd left a message, that something significant waited below. The Onslow Company dug with renewed intensity. 95 feet, 98 feet. At 98 feet, they couldn't dig deeper before nightfall. But they probed to the bottom with a long metal rod. The rod sank through loose soil, then struck something solid. Wood. But this wood felt different from the platforms above. It sounded hollow when struck, like a chest, like a sealed container. The crew left the site that evening, planning to excavate the final few feet the next morning. They would reach the treasure tomorrow. After 8 years of waiting, after months of back-breaking labor, they were inches away. Daniel McGuinness walked home that night, imagining the wealth waiting in that wooden container. Gold coins, silver bars, jeweled artifacts, everything the legends promised, but the island had other plans. The workers arrived at dawn on a cool September morning. They approached the shaft expecting to complete their excavation within hours. Instead, they found catastrophe. The money pit, as they'd begun calling it, was filled with water, 60 feet of it. Overnight, the shaft had flooded completely, destroying months of work and submerging whatever lay at the bottom. The miners tried bailing. Impossible. They removed buckets of water, but the level never dropped. They organized bucket brigades with dozens of workers. The water remained constant, as if the shaft was connected to an infinite source. They tried pumping. The primitive pumps of 1803 couldn't handle the volume. For every gallon they removed, 2 gallons flowed back in. One of the mining engineers, a man named Thomas Nixon, spent days investigating the flood's source. He measured the water level at different times: high tide, low tide, no tide during storms. During calm weather, he made a chilling discovery. The water level in the money pit corresponded exactly to ocean tides. When the tide came in at Mahone Bay, the water in the shaft rose. When the tide receded, the shaft's water level dropped slightly, but never enough to continue digging. This meant the shaft was connected to the ocean. But how? The money pit was 500 feet from the nearest beach. The connection would have to be underground, a tunnel. Someone had dug a tunnel from the ocean to the money pit, and they designed it to flood the shaft. Whenever anyone dug too deep, this wasn't accidental. This was a trap. A deliberate defensive system built to protect whatever lay at the bottom. Nixon organized search parties to examine Oak Island's coastline. They needed to find where the flood tunnel connected to the ocean. For weeks, they found nothing. Then, during an unusually low tide, a young worker named James McNutt noticed Something strange on the island's south shore, in an area called Smith's Cove. The beach looked normal at first. Sand, rocks, seaweed. But McNutt noticed the sand was too uniform, too deliberately arranged. He dug into it and discovered something impossible. The entire beach was artificial. Someone had excavated the natural beach down to bedrock, then constructed an elaborate filtration system. The system worked like this. 5-finger drains, each about 4 feet wide, had been cut into the bedrock in a fan pattern. These drains converged toward a central collection point. The drains were filled with rocks, then covered with layers of coconut fiber for filtration. Above the fiber, beach stones created a false surface. Above that, sand made everything look natural. When the tide came in, seawater filtered through the rocks and fiber into the drains. The drains fed into a main tunnel that ran underground to the money pit. The engineering was extraordinary. Whoever built this understood hydrology, filtration, and underground construction. They'd calculated tidal flows, estimated water pressure, and designed a system that required no maintenance. It had been working perfectly for decades, perhaps centuries. The moment anyone dug deep enough in the money pit, they triggered the flood trap. Ocean water rushed through the tunnel, filling the shaft within hours. The Unsolved company attempted to block the flood tunnel. They dug exploratory shafts near Smith's Cove, trying to intercept and seal the water flow. They poured clay into suspected tunnel locations. They tried damming the artificial beach. Nothing worked. The tunnel was too deep, too well constructed, and apparently had multiple branches. Whoever designed this had anticipated every countermeasure. Winter arrived. Freezing temperatures forced the Onslow Company to abandon work until spring. But over that winter, Simeon Lenz made a critical realization. The flood trap's sophistication meant this wasn't pirate treasure. Pirates were sailors, not engineers. They didn't build complex hydraulic systems. They didn't dig 100-foot shafts with filtration beaches and flood tunnels that required knowledge available only to military engineers, mining specialists, or architects with advanced training. So who built this? And what were they protecting? Spring 1804 brought new attempts. The Onslow Company returned with reinforced equipment and a different strategy. If they couldn't stop the flood, they would dig a second shaft parallel to the money pit, then tunnel sideways to reach the treasure chamber. They would bypass the flood trap entirely. They dug shaft number 2 about 10 feet from the original pit. The work proceeded smoothly until they reached 110 feet, deeper than the money pit's bottom. Then they began the horizontal tunnel toward the treasure chamber. The miners broke through the money pit's wall on a Tuesday afternoon. Water exploded through the opening with devastating force. The horizontal tunnel flooded in seconds. 2 miners barely escaped with their lives, dragging themselves through rising water as the shaft filled behind them. The pressure at that depth was immense, far stronger than anyone anticipated. Within minutes, both shaft number 2 and the money pit were completely flooded, connected now by the horizontal tunnel they'd just dug. The Onslow Company tried one more time. Shaft number 3, same depth, different location. Same catastrophic result. The moment they breached the money pit's wall, water rushed in with such force that it nearly killed the entire digging crew. The island seemed to be defending itself. Or more accurately, whoever designed this defense system had thought of everything by autumn 1804. The Onslow Company was bankrupt. They'd spent every penny and achieved nothing except confirming that something extraordinary lay beneath Oak Island. The engineering complexity alone proved immense value. But the cost of excavation exceeded their resources. They abandoned the project, leaving behind flooded shafts, broken equipment, and a deepened mystery. Daniel McGuinness stood at the edge of the flooded money pit one final time. He was now 25 years old. He'd spent nearly a decade consumed by this mystery. He'd been so close, 98 feet, inches from the treasure. But the island had defeated him, not through lack of effort, not through insufficient funding, but through engineering so sophisticated that it seemed almost supernatural as he walked toward his boat for the last time. Daniel noticed something. Carved into a tree near the money pit was a symbol, fresh, cut recently. Someone had been on the island while they dug. Someone had watched their attempts. Someone had carved this symbol, perhaps as a message. The symbol was a triangle with a circle inside. Below it, scratched letters, cave dinceps. Daniel didn't know Latin, but Thomas Nixon did. The engineer examined the carving and translated it. Beware henceforth. Someone was still protecting Oak Island's secret, even after all these years, even after the original builders were surely dead. Someone maintained watch. Someone carved warnings. Someone ensured the treasure stayed hidden, and that was more terrifying than any pirate legend. The story of Oak Island's flooded pit spread through Nova Scotia like wildfire. By 1805, every tavern from Halifax to Yarmouth buzzed with theories. Who built that elaborate trap? What treasure justified such engineering? The speculation ranged from plausible to absurd, from historical to fantastical. But three theories dominated the conversation, each one more intriguing than the last. The first theory was obvious. Captain William Kidd. Every treasure hunter in North America knew Kidd's story. Born in Scotland, became a privateer, turned pirate, captured in 1699, hanged in London in 1701. Before his execution, Kidd allegedly told authorities about hidden treasure. He offered to reveal its location in exchange for his life. They refused. He went to the gallows with his secret. Historical records confirmed Kidd sailed near Nova Scotia. His ship, the Adventure Galley, had cruised these waters in 1698 and 1699. Mahon Bay offered perfect conditions for a pirate needing to hide plunder. Dozens of islands, treacherous currents, fog-shrouded coves. Local authorities were scarce. British naval patrols rarely ventured this far from Halifax. A pirate could work undisturbed for weeks, but the timing created problems. Kidd was captured in Boston in July 1699. The Oak Island excavation, based on tree growth analysis and tackle block deterioration, appeared to predate 1699 by several decades. The oak tree's branch showed groove were suggesting 40 or 50 years of weathering before Daniel. McGuinness found it in 1795. That pushed the construction. Date back to the 1740s or 1750s, long after Kidd's death, unless Kidd wasn't the builder. What if he'd discovered an existing vault and added to it? What if the money pit was older than anyone suspected, and Kidd merely used an existing hiding place? That would explain the sophisticated engineering. Kidd didn't build it. He found it. He deposited his treasure in someone else's vault. But whose vault? The second theory involved a man few Nova Scotians had heard of in 1805, Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. Unlike Kidd, Blackbeard was a true monster. He terrorized the Atlantic coast from 1716 to 1718, capturing over 40 merchant ships, accumulating vast wealth, and earning a reputation for theatrical cruelty. He tied lit fuses into his beard during battles, creating a demonic appearance through smoke and flame. Blackbeard died in combat off North Carolina in November 1718. British naval officer Robert Maynard killed him in hand-to-hand fighting. Blackbeard's body, according to legend, received 15 gunshot wounds and 5 sword cuts before he finally fell. After the battle, searchers ransacked Blackbeard's ships and hideouts, but found relatively little treasure. Certainly not the fortune he should have accumulated after 2 years of relentless piracy. Where was Blackbeard's treasure? Some believed he'd hidden it along the Carolina coast. Others suggested Caribbean islands. But a small group of researchers noticed something interesting. In early 1718, 9 months before his death, Blackbeard sailed north. He blockaded Charleston, South Carolina, then disappeared for 6 weeks. No recorded sightings, no attacks, no activity. Then he reappeared near North Carolina as if nothing had happened. 6 weeks was enough time to sail to Nova Scotia, construct a hiding place, deposit treasure, and return south. Mahone Bay was far from Blackbeard's usual hunting grounds, which made it perfect. No one would think to search there. And if Blackbeard possessed maps or information about an existing vault on Oak Island, he might have used it. The timing worked. The geography worked. And Blackbeard had the resources to hire skilled engineers if needed. But again, problems emerged. Blackbeard was a sailor, not an engineer. The Money Pit's flood trap required specialized knowledge that pirates typically didn't possess. Maritime flooding systems existed, certainly. Ships used complex pumping and drainage mechanisms. But translating that knowledge into underground construction required expertise beyond most pirates' capabilities, unless Blackbeard had help. Unless someone with engineering knowledge assisted him. Someone who understood mining, hydraulics, and construction. Someone whose identity remained hidden because they couldn't. Risk association with piracy. The third theory was strangest of all, and it began with a mysterious visitor to Nova Scotia in 1809. A man calling himself Thomas Jefferson Beale arrived in Chester, asking questions about Oak Island. Beale was educated, well-dressed, and carried himself like a military officer. He spent 3 weeks interviewing locals who'd worked with the Onslow Company. He examined the flooded shaft. He studied Smith's Cove's artificial beach. Then he left, telling no one where he was going or why he was interested. Beale's visit sparked wild speculation. Some locals insisted he wasn't really named Beale. That was an alias. His accent suggested European origin, possibly French or Spanish. His questions focused oddly on the shaft's depth and the wooden platform's construction. He seemed less interested in treasure than in confirming specific engineering details, as if comparing the Money Pit to something he'd seen elsewhere. One retired sailor who spoke with Beale reported something strange. When the sailor mentioned the coconut fiber found in the shaft, Beale's reaction was intense. He demanded exact details. How much fiber? What condition? How deep was it buried? The sailor remembered thinking Beale already knew these answers. He was testing whether the sailor's information was accurate. Before leaving Nova Scotia, Beale visited a local priest and made a cryptic statement. What sleeps beneath that island is older than piracy, older than this country. It sleeps there because powerful men feared what it represented. Let it sleep. The priest, Father Richard O'Flaherty, recorded this conversation in his journal. Decades later, researchers discovered O'Flaherty's journals in a Halifax library. The Beale entry sparked a theory that seemed impossible, yet explained much of Oak Island's mystery: the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were medieval warrior monks, founded in 1119 to protect Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. Over 2 centuries, they became incredibly wealthy and powerful, accumulating treasure through donations, banking operations, and spoils of war. They owned castles, ships, and land across Europe and the Mediterranean. They loaned money to kings. They were, essentially, medieval Europe's banking system. Then, in 1307, King Philip IV of France, deeply indebted to the Templars, moved against them. On Friday, October 13th, Philip ordered the arrest of every Templar in France. Hundreds were imprisoned, tortured, executed. The order was officially dissolved by papal decree in 1312. The Templars' vast wealth disappeared. Some was seized by Philip. Most vanished completely. Where did it go? Templar ships, witnesses reported, left French ports days before Philip's arrests. These ships sailed west, carrying unknown cargo. They were never seen again. One persistent legend claimed the Templars reached North America over a century before Columbus. They supposedly established temporary settlements, hid their treasure, then returned to Europe. The treasure remained in the New World, waiting for a day when the Templars could safely retrieve it. Could Oak Island be a Templar vault? The engineering sophistication matched Templar capabilities. They were expert builders, having constructed dozens of castles and fortifications. They understood hydraulics from building water systems in desert climates. They had resources to transport materials like coconut fiber from Mediterranean territories, and they had motivation to hide their wealth somewhere, unreachable by European authorities. The carved stone at 90 feet added credibility. The symbols didn't match any known alphabet, but they resembled codes Templars used for secret communications. Templar documents often contained mathematical puzzles, symbolic references, and encrypted messages. The stone could be a Templar marker, explaining the vault's contents and security measures. But the Templar theory faced enormous obstacles. First, no confirmed evidence proved Templars reached North America in the 1300s. Second, even if they did, why Nova Scotia? Third, if Templars built this vault in the early 1300s, how did it remain secret for 500 years? Someone must have maintained it. Someone must have known its location. That suggested an organization, a continuity of knowledge spanning centuries. Some theorists proposed the Freemasons. Freemasonry emerged in the 1600s, and many Freemasons claimed spiritual descent from the Templars. If Templars really built the Oak Island Vault, perhaps Freemasons inherited knowledge of its location. Perhaps Freemasonry's true purpose wasn't philosophical enlightenment, but protecting the Templar treasure until it could be safely recovered. This theory explained the mysterious lights Daniel McGuinness saw in 1795. Perhaps Freemasons periodically visited Oak Island to inspect the vault. The carved warning cave dinceps found after the Onslow Company's work suggested ongoing guardianship. Someone was still watching, still protecting the secret. By 1810, Oak Island had become more than a treasure hunt. It was a mystery attracting historians, conspiracy theorists, and amateur archaeologists. Publications in Boston and New York published articles about the money pit. Theories multiplied. Spanish conquistadors hiding Aztec gold. French military engineers concealing military payrolls. Even wilder claims emerged. Vikings, ancient Egyptians, or Phoenician sailors who'd somehow reached Nova Scotia in antiquity. Most educated people dismissed these theories as fantasy. But a few nagging facts remained unexplained. The engineering was real. The flood trap was real. The coconut fiber was real. The carved stone was real. Someone with significant resources and knowledge built this vault. The question wasn't whether treasure existed. The question was whose treasure, and why they'd gone to such extraordinary lengths to protect it. In 1845, a new company formed to excavate Oak Island. The Truro Company brought better equipment and fresh determination. They would solve this mystery, but they would also discover something that transformed Oak Island from a treasure hunt into something darker, something that suggested the real secret wasn't gold or silver. It was information, documents, evidence of something powerful people desperately wanted destroyed. Meanwhile, stories began circulating among Nova Scotia's indigenous Micmac people. Elders spoke of the island, the spirit's guard. They said their ancestors had been warned never to dig there. That long ago, pale-skinned strangers had come with ships and tools. They'd worked for months, digging deep into the earth. The Micmac watched from the mainland but never approached. Their shamans sensed dark purpose in that excavation. They sensed something being buried that should never be unearthed. When the pale strangers finally left, Micmac leaders declared Oak Island forbidden. Tribal law prohibited anyone from visiting it. The prohibition lasted generations. Even in the 1800s, Micmac families avoided the island. They wouldn't explain why. They simply said, what sleeps there should continue sleeping. Father O'Flaherty collected these stories before his death in 1843. His final journal entry about Oak Island was chilling. I have heard 3 theories: pirates, Templars, or something older. I pray the truth is pirates. I fear it is the third option. May God have mercy on whoever finally reaches the bottom of that shaft. They may find treasure, but I suspect they will find something that men were meant never to know. The Truro Company ignored such warnings. They were practical men, interested in practical treasure. They didn't believe in curses, spirits, or ancient secrets. They believed in engineering, excavation, and profit. They would dig until they reached the bottom. They would discover what lay beneath Oak Island, and they would prove, once and for all, that this mystery had a rational explanation. They were wrong. Summer 1849. The Truro Company arrived on Oak Island with ambitions larger than any previous expedition. They brought steam-powered pumps, professional mining engineers, and investment capital totaling £12,000. Their leader, Jotham McCulley, was a decorated mining engineer who'd worked in coal operations across Nova Scotia. If anyone could defeat the Money Pit's flood trap, it was McCulley. But McCulley brought something else: caution. He'd studied every failed attempt since 1795. He'd interviewed survivors of the Onslow Company. He understood that brute force wouldn't work. The flood system was too sophisticated, too perfectly engineered. They needed a different approach. They would drill first, excavate later, map the underground structure before committing to full-scale digging. The Truro team cleared the Money Pit of accumulated debris and began drilling exploratory holes. They used a pod auger, a hollow drill that extracted core samples showing exactly what lay below. The drill descended through water and mud until, at 98 feet, it struck wood, solid oak, about 6 inches thick. The drill penetrated and continued downward. The next 12 inches revealed something extraordinary. The auger brought up small metal fragments, links, pieces that looked like chain. The drill operator, James McNutt, examined them carefully. Gold. These weren't iron fragments corroded by seawater. These were gold chain links, deliberately placed in the shaft. This was the first tangible proof of valuable metal at the money pit's bottom, below the metal layer. The drill passed through 4 inches of oak, then 22 inches of what felt like spruce or pine, softer wood, easier to penetrate. Then another metal layer, more fragments, more chain pieces. Then something that stunned everyone. 7 feet of solid oak. Not logs laid horizontally. Not a platform. This was massive timber, carefully fitted together. A vault. An actual constructed chamber at 104 feet depth. The truer engineers couldn't contain their excitement. They'd found it. The treasure chamber. 7 feet of oak meant a room, large enough to contain chests, boxes, perhaps entire shipments of gold and silver. The metal fragments proved valuable contents, and the construction, far more elaborate than the platforms above, suggested this was the true vault. Everything above was simply protection. This chamber at 104 feet was the prize. But when the auger was extracted, something disturbing happened. James McNutt was alone when he removed the drill bit and examined what clung to it. Other workers were at the windlass, focused on raising the heavy equipment. McNutt saw something on the auger. Something small. Something that made his eyes widen. He quickly pocketed it, glanced around to ensure no one noticed, then calmly announced the drill was ready for cleaning. What did McNutt take? Nobody knows with certainty. But 3 days later, he quietly left Oak Island. He traveled to Halifax, booked passage to England, and never returned to Nova Scotia. Before leaving, he visited a jeweler in Halifax and sold something. The jeweler, questioned years later, remembered McNutt, but claimed confidentiality prevented disclosure. Whatever McNutt sold, it was valuable enough to fund his relocation to England and establish him in comfortable circumstances. The Truro Company continued drilling without McNutt. They mapped the underground structure as best they could. The vault chamber appeared to extend at least 30 feet in diameter, far larger than anyone expected. This wasn't a chest. This wasn't even a small room. This was a major underground installation, comparable to bank vaults or military bunkers. Who had the resources to build this? Who had the motivation? Macaulay made a critical decision. They would dig a new shaft parallel to the money pit, reach the vault's depth, then tunnel sideways to access the chamber. This would bypass the flood trap entirely. They began shaft number 4, positioned 14 feet east of the original pit. The work proceeded smoothly through summer and into fall. By October, they'd reached 109 feet, successfully passing the vault's depth. Then they started the horizontal tunnel toward the treasure chamber. The miners worked in shifts, excavating carefully through dense clay. On October 12, 1849, at approximately 2 in the afternoon, they broke through into the money pit. For one brief, glorious moment, they saw the vault chamber. They saw wooden walls. They saw something that looked like chests or boxes. They saw what might have been metal glinting in their lamplight. Then the water came, not gradually, not as a slow leak. The ocean arrived with the force of a breached dam. Water exploded through the opening with such violence that it knocked miners off their feet. The horizontal tunnel flooded completely within 30 seconds. The surge pushed back into shaft number 4, rising so rapidly that 2 workers barely escaped with their lives. Within 5 minutes, both shafts were flooded to sea level. The money pit and shaft number 4 were now connected by the tunnel the miners had just dug, and both were completely unusable. Worse, the violent flooding had destabilized the vault chamber. The wooden walls they'd briefly glimpsed had collapsed. Whatever chests or boxes existed had likely been smashed and scattered by the water pressure. The Truro engineers were devastated. They'd been inches away. They'd seen the treasure. But the flood trap had triggered exactly as designed, and with such ferocity that it destroyed what they'd come to find. Macaulay realized with horror that whoever built this system had anticipated exactly their strategy. The flood didn't just protect the treasure. It destroyed the treasure if anyone got too close. This was a doomsday mechanism. If we can't have it, nobody can. But why? What treasure was so sensitive that its builders preferred destruction over discovery? This wasn't rational protection. This was something else. Something that suggested the vault's contents weren't meant to enrich someone. They were meant to remain hidden permanently, even from whoever originally buried them. The Truro Company didn't give up. They attempted to dam Smith's Cove's artificial beach, blocking the flood tunnel's intake. They built a massive coffer dam, isolating the beach from the ocean during low tide. Workers excavated the beach, trying to locate and seal the collection drains feeding the main tunnel. The work was dangerous. Tides were unpredictable. Storms destroyed their dam twice before they completed it. Finally, in November 1849, they'd successfully isolated the beach. The drains were exposed. The coconut fiber filtration system lay bare. They could see exactly how water entered the system. They began filling the drains with clay, believing they'd finally stopped the flood mechanism. They returned to the money pit, began pumping, and waited for the water level to drop. It didn't. The water remained constant, rising and falling with ocean tides, exactly as before. The Smith's Cove tunnel was either still functional despite their damming efforts, or there was a second tunnel they hadn't discovered. The engineering was more complex than they'd imagined. Multiple intake points, redundant systems, backup mechanisms. During this time, something else happened. Something that would later be called the beginning of the Oak Island curse. A worker named Maynard Kaiser was operating the pump equipment near shaft number 4 when a support beam cracked. The beam, stressed by constant water pressure and vibration from the steam pumps, split suddenly. It fell, striking Kaiser across the back. He died 3 days later from internal injuries. He was 37 years old, left a widow and 4 children. Kaiser was the first confirmed death directly related to Oak Island excavation. Local people began speaking of a curse. Micmac elders said they'd warned against disturbing the island. Fishermen reported strange occurrences. Boats that entered the cove around Oak Island experienced compass malfunctions. Fish wouldn't bite in certain areas. Birds avoided nesting on particular parts of the island. These could be coincidences, natural phenomena, or superstition, but the stories accumulated. The Truro Company continued through winter, though progress slowed dramatically. They dug shaft number 5 in early 1850, attempting yet another approach to the vault. At 75 feet, this shaft suddenly flooded even faster than the others. Water surged upward with enough force to blow tools out of the shaft. Engineers realized they'd accidentally drilled into the flood tunnel itself. The tunnel was approximately 75 feet below surface, running at a slight upward angle from Smith's Cove to the money pit. This discovery let them map the tunnel's approximate path. It ran roughly 500 feet from the artificial beach to the money pit, maintaining enough grade to ensure constant water flow. The tunnel's dimensions were substantial, at least 4 feet high, possibly wider. This wasn't a simple pipe. This was a constructed passage, large enough for a person to crawl through if it weren't flooded. Who dug a 500-foot tunnel through solid rock and clay? The labor alone would require dozens of workers for months. The engineering knowledge to maintain proper grade over that distance suggested professional surveyors. And the purpose, designing a self-sustaining flood mechanism, implied military engineering expertise. This wasn't pirate work. This was military, or governmental, or something equally organized and resourced. By summer 1850, the Truro Company was financially exhausted. They'd spent everything and achieved nothing except confirming the treasure's existence and destroying it in the process. Investors demanded they stop. Workers refused to continue without better safety measures after Kaiser's death. Equipment was sold to pay mounting debts. Jotham Macaulay wrote his final report in August 1850. The document was remarkably honest. We have failed. Not through lack of effort or expertise, but because the engineering opposing us exceeds anything I have encountered in 30 years of mining. Whoever designed this system possessed knowledge beyond their era. I cannot explain the precision of the flood mechanism or the sophistication of the vault construction. I can only confirm that something of immense value was buried at 104 feet depth, and that this something is now likely destroyed by our own actions. I recommend future expeditions bring significantly greater resources, or abandon the project entirely. Oak Island has defeated us. The report generated controversy. Some investors accused Macaulay of incompetence. Others suggested he'd secretly found treasure and invented the destruction story to keep it for himself. Macaulay defended his reputation vigorously, but the accusations damaged him. He never worked another major mining project. He died in 1859, still defending his Oak Island decisions, still insisting the treasure had been real. After the Truro Company's failure, Oak Island entered a period of reduced activity. Small groups occasionally attempted excavation, but without serious funding or equipment. The shafts remained flooded. The artificial beach slowly returned to natural appearance as ocean action redistributed sand over the exposed filtration system. By 1860, Oak Island looked almost pristine again. Nature was reclaiming it, but the stories didn't stop. People reported strange lights again. Not frequently, but occasionally. Once or twice a year, fishermen would see unexplained illumination moving across the island at night. Investigators found nothing. No camps, no excavation evidence, no indication anyone had been there. Yet the lights continued, and people began disappearing. Not many, not dramatically. But over the decades following the Truro expedition, at least 7 people vanished after visiting Oak Island. Some were treasure hunters, hoping to investigate privately. Others were curiosity seekers, wanting to see the famous money pit. They'd row to the island, walk into the forest, and never return. Their boats would be found abandoned on the beach. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just gone, local authorities investigated. They found nothing. The island seemed to swallow people. One theory suggested they fell into hidden shafts dug by previous expeditions. Another proposed they got lost in the extensive tunnel system and drowned. But some disappearances happened in broad daylight, in areas well away from known excavation sites. Those were harder to explain. By 1865, Oak Island had claimed to confirmed deaths and 7 disappearances. The local curse legend evolved into something specific. 7 must die before the treasure is found. Nobody knew where this saying originated. Some attributed it to Micmac prophecy. Others claimed it was an old sailor's curse from the 1700s, but everyone in the region knew it. 7 deaths before the treasure yields its secret. Only 2 deaths had occurred so far. 5 more to go. The 20th century arrived with new technology and renewed ambition. In 1909, a Boston-based group called the Old Gold Salvage Company purchased excavation rights to Oak Island. They brought something previous expeditions lacked: drilling equipment capable of penetrating to 200 feet. If the treasure vault truly existed at 104 feet, they would map everything below it, around it, and above it before attempting physical excavation. The Old Gold Salvage Company's lead investor was a wealthy businessman named Frederick Blair. Unlike previous treasure hunters driven by fantasies of instant wealth, Blair approached Oak Island systematically. He studied 50 years of failed attempts. He interviewed surviving workers from the Truro expedition. He hired geologists to analyze the island's substrata. Blair understood that solving Oak Island required treating it as an engineering problem, not a treasure hunt. Blair's team began drilling in summer 1909. Their equipment was revolutionary for its time. Steam-powered drills, steel bits, and extraction augers that could bring up larger core samples than earlier wooden pod augers. They drilled dozens of test holes across the Money Pit area, creating a 3-dimensional map of underground structures. What they discovered was disturbing. The vault chamber at 104 feet appeared to have collapsed, exactly as the Truro engineers feared. Their drilling brought up fragments of shattered wood, pieces of what might have been leather, and small metal scraps, but no intact chests, no organized treasure. The violent flooding in 1849 had apparently destroyed the chamber's contents and scattered them throughout the lower shaft, but Blair's team found something else. At 153 feet, their drill struck a different structure, another chamber, smaller than the vault above, but definitely artificial. The auger brought up cement or mortar samples mixed with fragments of parchment. The parchment was too degraded to read, but its existence proved documents had been stored at this depth. Why bury documents so deep? What information was worth this level of protection? The cement samples were analyzed by chemists in Boston. The composition was unusual: Mediterranean sand, volcanic ash, ingredients not available in Nova Scotia. The mortar had been manufactured elsewhere, transported to Oak Island, and used in underground construction. This supported the Templar theory. Templars, active across the Mediterranean, would have access to such materials. Pirates wouldn't. But Blair discovered something even more intriguing. While researching historical records in Halifax, he found a shipping manifest from 1746, a French military vessel. The Marquise had anchored in Mahon Bay for 3 weeks that year. The manifest listed its cargo as engineering equipment and construction materials. The ship was commanded by Captain Charles Roach, a military engineer who'd supervised fortification projects in Quebec. The timing was perfect. Tree ring analysis of the oak platforms suggested construction occurred in the mid-1740s. French military engineer with construction materials anchoring at Mahone Bay in 1746. couldn't be coincidence. Blair theorized that French military forces, not pirates or Templars, had built the money pit. But why? What was France hiding on a remote Nova Scotia island? One possibility involved the War of Austrian Succession, which raged from 1740 to 1748. France and Britain fought across North America during this period. French forces captured the British fortress at Louisbourg in 1745. Perhaps French command buried military payroll, treasury gold, or sensitive documents on Oak Island, intending to retrieve them after the war. But France lost the war. Louisbourg returned to British control. If French military treasure was buried on Oak Island, France never recovered it. Blair pursued this theory vigorously. He contacted French military archives, requesting information about Captain Roach and the Marquise. He received polite responses, but no useful documents. Either the records didn't exist, or French authorities weren't willing to share them. Blair suspected the latter. If French military treasure remained on Oak Island, France might still claim legal ownership. While Blair investigated historical theories, his drilling operations continued. In 1911, one of his workers made an extraordinary discovery. At 171 feet, the drill brought up a small piece of parchment, larger and better preserved than previous fragments. It contained visible writing. 3 characters could be identified before the parchment crumbled: Vi and what might have been M or W. Blair showed the parchment to paleographers at Harvard University. They determined the ink composition and parchment preparation technique dated to the 17th or early 18th century. The writing style suggested Latin or French, but 3 characters weren't enough to decode any meaningful message. Still, this proved conclusively that documents existed deep in the money pit. Someone had buried papers alongside whatever treasure they'd hidden. News of the parchment discovery reached newspapers across North America. The New York Times published an article titled "Mystery of Oak Island Deepens." The Boston Globe interviewed Blair, who declared, "We will solve this mystery within 5 years. The treasure exists. We have proof. We simply need adequate funding and better equipment." Blair's confidence attracted new investors, including a young law student named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In 1909, Roosevelt was 27 years old, recently graduated from Harvard, and fascinated by adventure and mystery. He read about Oak Island in the Times and immediately contacted Blair, offering to invest $500 in the Old Gold Salvage Company. Roosevelt visited Oak Island in summer 1909. He spent 3 days examining the site, talking with workers, and studying Blair's maps. He left convinced the treasure was real. For the next several years, Roosevelt maintained correspondence with Blair, requesting updates and occasionally contributing additional funds. Even after becoming Assistant Secretary of the Navy in 1913, Roosevelt followed Oak Island developments. His interest would continue throughout his presidency from 1933 to 1945. Roosevelt's involvement added legitimacy to Oak Island. If a future president believed in the treasure, perhaps it wasn't mere fantasy. Investors flocked to Blair's company. By 1912, the Old Gold Salvage Company had raised over $50,000, an enormous sum for the era. They purchased better equipment, hired more workers, and planned the most aggressive excavation attempt yet. Then tragedy struck. On August 17, 1912, a worker named James Stratton was operating a steam-powered drill when a bearing seized. The drill jerked violently, and the exhaust pipe, superheated from hours of operation, struck Stratton across the chest. He suffered severe burns and died 8 days later from infection. He was 42 years old, leaving a wife and 6 children with no compensation. Beyond his final week's wages, Stratton's death rekindled cursed superstitions. He was the 3rd confirmed fatality connected to Oak Island excavations. The 7 must die prophecy was now 3/7 complete. Workers became noticeably more cautious, some refusing particularly dangerous assignments. Blair tried to maintain morale, but fear had taken root. Worse, Stratton's death attracted negative publicity. Newspapers questioned the safety of Blair's operations. Labor unions criticized working conditions. The Nova Scotia government considered imposing regulations on treasure hunting activities. Investors grew nervous. Several withdrew funding. By late 1912, the Old Gold Salvage Company was struggling financially despite Blair's confident public statements. The company struggled on until 1914, when World War I began. Suddenly, nobody cared about treasure hunting. Young workers enlisted or were drafted. Equipment manufacturers focused on military contracts. Investors diverted funds to war bonds. Oak Island operations ceased entirely. Blair maintained ownership but conducted no excavation from 1914 until 1919. After the war, Blair resumed smaller-scale operations. He couldn't afford major excavations, but he continued drilling and mapping. In 1926, he made another significant discovery. At 212 feet, his drill broke through into a void, an empty space. A cavern or chamber far deeper than anyone suspected. The drill descended 40 feet before striking bottom again. This meant a massive cavity existed over 200 feet, underground. Blair couldn't determine whether this cavity was natural or artificial. Geologists suggested it might be a collapsed limestone cave, but the Money Pit area didn't have significant limestone deposits. The bedrock was primarily anhydrite, a type of evaporite rock that didn't form large caves. If the cavity wasn't natural, someone had excavated it. But for what purpose? Storage, a second vault, or was this connected to the flood tunnel system? The 1930s brought renewed interest as the Great Depression made treasure hunting attractive to desperate men. Several small groups attempted excavation, though none had serious funding or equipment. Most abandoned their efforts within months. Oak Island defeated them, as it had defeated everyone before. In 1936, another death occurred. A visitor named Thomas Nixon, possibly a descendant of the engineer who'd worked for the Unsolved company, fell into an unmarked shaft left from previous excavations. The shaft, overgrown and hidden by vegetation, was approximately 60 feet deep and filled with 40 feet of water. Nixon's body wasn't recovered for 3 days. He was 54 years old, a retired schoolteacher exploring Oak Island out of curiosity. For deaths, 3 more to go before the prophecy was complete. World War II again halted operations. Blair, now elderly, maintained his research but conducted no physical excavation. He spent the war years compiling every document, map, and report related to Oak Island into a comprehensive archive. He interviewed aging survivors from 19th century expeditions, recording their memories before they died. Blair understood he might never solve the mystery himself, but he could preserve knowledge for future treasure hunters. Frederick Blair died in 1951 at age 80. He'd spent 42 years working on Oak Island. He'd invested his own fortune and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars from others. He'd drilled over 100 test holes, mapped underground structures, and compiled the most comprehensive archive of Oak Island history. But he never found the treasure. He never solved the mystery. Blair's archive passed to his nephew, who sold it to a Toronto lawyer named Robert Dunfield in 1965. Dunfield would launch the next major excavation attempt, bringing 20th century technology to bear on Oak Island's ancient secrets. But the 1940s and 1950s weren't completely quiet. Strange incidents continued. In 1947, a group of teenagers camping on the island reported hearing sounds underground, metallic clanging like tools striking stone. The sounds came from beneath their feet, as if someone was working deep below. They fled the island, terrified. Investigators found nothing. In 1952, a fisherman anchoring near Oak Island at night saw lights again. Not just one light, but several, moving in organized patterns across the island's eastern end. He watched for 20 minutes before the lights vanished. He reported it to authorities, who searched the island the next day. No evidence of recent human activity, no footprints, no tools, nothing. These incidents, combined with the deaths and disappearances, cemented Oak Island's reputation as cursed. By 1960, most Nova Scotians believed the island was genuinely dangerous, possibly haunted, certainly unlucky. Fishermen avoided anchoring near it. Teenagers dared each other to visit, but rarely followed through. The island sat largely abandoned, its secrets protected not by engineering but by reputation. Yet the mystery endured. Books were published analyzing Oak Island theories. Magazine articles speculated about the treasure. Roosevelt, now deceased, left papers mentioning his youthful Oak Island investment. The story had entered popular culture, becoming part of North American folklore. The island itself might be abandoned, but the legend was immortal. And somewhere, deep beneath that island, something waited. Documents at 171 feet, a cavity at 212 feet, fragments of gold chain, pieces of parchment, cement made from Mediterranean sand. Evidence of human activity spanning possibly centuries. Evidence of secrets someone desperately wanted buried. 4 people had died trying to uncover those secrets. 3 more deaths, according to prophecy, before the truth emerged. If the prophecy was real, if death was the price of knowledge, if Oak Island would ever yield its treasure, the island waited, patient, silent, protected by water, darkness, and fear. Waited for the next generation of treasure hunters, brave or foolish enough to challenge it. The years between 1960 and 2000 were Oak Island's forgotten era. The island that had consumed fortunes and lives now sat abandoned, slowly returning to wilderness. Flooded shafts filled with sediment. Wooden structures rotted and collapsed. Nature reclaimed clearings where excavation equipment once stood. To casual observers, Oak Island looked like any other small Atlantic island, unremarkable, peaceful, silent. But that silence was deceptive, because while large-scale excavations had ceased, the island never truly emptied. Small groups continued visiting, amateur treasure hunters with metal detectors, historians researching the mystery, curious tourists who'd read about the legend. Most left disappointed, a few never left at all. In 1962, a geology student from Dalhousie University named Robert Restall convinced his family to move to Oak Island. Restall had studied Frederick Blair's archives and believed previous excavations had missed something obvious. He obtained permission from the island's owners to conduct limited exploration in exchange for maintaining the property. It seemed like a reasonable arrangement. Restall would live on the island with his wife and 2 sons, age 18 and 16. While pursuing his treasure hunt, Restall's theory focused on the artificial beach at Smith's Cove. He believed the flood tunnel's intake system was more extensive than previously documented. Perhaps multiple tunnels existed, branching from a central collection chamber. If he could locate and excavate this chamber, he might find artifacts left by the original builders. Tool marks, construction debris, maybe even documents explaining the vault's purpose. For 3 years, the Restall family worked at Smith's Cove. They lived in a small cabin near the shore, spending long days excavating the beach during low tides. Robert Restall was methodical, documenting everything he found. Fragments of coconut fiber, pieces of wooden channeling, stone drains exactly as previous expeditions had reported, but nothing new. Nothing that advanced understanding of the flood system. The work was physically demanding and financially draining. The family survived on savings and occasional small donations from supporters who believed in Restall's research. His wife, Mildred, kept a journal of their Oak Island years. Her entries grew increasingly pessimistic. August 1963. Robert won't give up. I fear this obsession will destroy us. March 1964. The boys are losing faith. They want to return to normal life. But Robert sees something the rest of us don't. Or perhaps he sees what he wants to see. On August 17, 1965, exactly 53 years after James Stratton's death, tragedy struck again. Robert Restall was working alone in a shaft near Smith's Cove when he was overcome by gas fumes. Natural gases, probably methane or hydrogen sulfide, had accumulated in the confined space. Restall collapsed, falling into water at the shaft's bottom. His eldest son, Robert Jr., heard his father fall and rushed to help. He climbed into the shaft without considering the gas danger. He collapsed within seconds, falling beside his father. A worker helping the Restalls that day, Carl Grazer, also attempted rescue. He too succumbed to the gas. A fourth man, Cyril Hiltz, began descending before others pulled him back. He survived, barely. 3 men died within minutes. Robert Restall, age 53. Robert Restall Jr., aged. Carl Grazer, age 46. Their bodies were recovered later that day. The cause of death was confirmed as asphyxiation from toxic gas accumulation. A tragic accident, entirely preventable if proper safety protocols had been followed. But also the 5th, 6th, and 7th deaths connected to Oak Island excavations. 7 deaths. The prophecy was complete. The Restall tragedy devastated Nova Scotia. 3 men dead because of an island's curse. That's how newspapers framed it. Oak Island claims 3 more victims. Cursed treasure kills father and son. The coverage was sensational, horrifying, and effective. Public opinion turned decisively against treasure hunting on Oak Island. Local authorities implemented strict regulations. The island's owners, shaken by the deaths, prohibited all excavation activities. Oak Island entered a period of enforced silence. From 1965 to 1970, virtually nobody visited the island except occasional researchers with explicit permission. No digging, no drilling, no attempts to solve the mystery. The money pit and its satellite shafts remained flooded. The artificial beach returned to natural appearance. The curse legend, now apparently fulfilled, kept most people away. But something strange happened after the 7th death. People who'd lived near Oak Island for decades noticed a change. The mysterious lights, reported sporadically for 2 centuries, stopped appearing completely between 1795 and 1965. At least 40 documented sightings of unexplained lights on Oak Island existed. After 1965, none. It was as if whatever presence guarded the island had achieved its goal and departed. Or perhaps it was satisfied. 7 deaths. The price paid. The warning delivered. Stay away. Mildred Restall and her younger son left Nova Scotia immediately after the funerals. She never spoke publicly about Oak Island again. Her journal, discovered decades later, ended with a single sentence written the day after the tragedy. Some secrets are meant to remain buried. The 1970s brought a different kind of treasure hunter. Not wealthy investors or professional engineers, but academics. Archaeologists, historians, and researchers approached Oak Island as an intellectual puzzle rather than a source of wealth. They weren't interested in finding treasure. They wanted to understand who built the money pit and why. Dr. Edwin Hamilton, a professor of archaeology at Boston University, spent the summer of 1972 conducting non-invasive surveys of Oak Island. He used newly available technology, ground-penetrating radar, magnetic detection equipment, and seismic sensors. His goal was mapping underground structures without excavation. Hamilton's findings were fascinating. The radar detected multiple anomalies beneath the island's eastern end. Large voids, possibly chambers or collapsed tunnels. Linear features suggesting constructed channels. And something unexpected. The underground structures extended far beyond the money pit area. Hamilton detected anomalies stretching across nearly a quarter of the island. Whatever was buried here wasn't a simple vault. It was a complex, possibly interconnected system. But Hamilton made another discovery that troubled him deeply. Some of the underground voids appeared to be natural caves. Oak Island's bedrock, primarily anhydrite, could dissolve over centuries if exposed to flowing water. The flood tunnel from Smith's Cove might have accelerated this process, creating a network of caverns beneath the island. If true, this meant excavation was even more dangerous than anyone suspected. The ground could collapse unpredictably, creating sinkholes that would swallow equipment and workers. Hamilton published his findings in 1974, concluding, Oak Island presents an archaeological enigma worthy of serious study. However, any attempt at excavation poses extreme danger. The subsurface instability, combined with active flooding mechanisms, makes this site one of the most hazardous archaeological locations I've encountered. I recommend against physical excavation until technology advances sufficiently to conduct safe remote exploration. His recommendation went unheeded. In 1976, a Canadian businessman named David Tobias acquired rights to Oak Island. Tobias had studied every previous expedition and believed modern technology could succeed where 19th century equipment had failed. He formed Triton Alliance, a company specifically created to solve the Oak Island mystery. Triton Alliance brought impressive resources, deep-sea diving equipment, industrial pumps capable of moving thousands of gallons per minute, professional cave divers experienced in flooded environments. Tobias invested over $1 million, an enormous sum for treasure hunting. He was determined to reach the bottom of the money pit. Flood trap or not, the first major Triton operation occurred in summer 1976. Divers entered the flooded money pit wearing full scuba gear, attempting to reach the vault chamber at 104 feet. The first diver descended to 80 feet before encountering zero visibility. The water was completely opaque, filled with sediment, rotted wood fragments, and decades of accumulated debris. The diver couldn't see his own hands. Navigation was impossible. They tried again with underwater lights. Useless. The particulate density was too great. They tried pumping water from the shaft to clear sediment. The flood tunnel immediately refilled it. Every gallon they removed was replaced by 2 gallons of seawater. The flood system, after over 2 centuries, still functioned perfectly. In 1977, Triton attempted a different approach. They would use an underwater camera, lowered on a cable, to photograph the vault chamber. They couldn't reach it physically, but they could see it. The camera descended through murky water, its lights barely penetrating the gloom. At approximately 100 feet, the camera captured images that would become Oak Island's most controversial evidence. The photographs were poor quality, grainy and indistinct, but they appeared to show something. Shapes that might be wooden chests, forms that could be human hands, possibly a severed hand preserved in the cold, oxygen-deprived water, and what looked like tools or metal implements scattered on the shaft bottom. Tobias released the photographs to media, claiming they proved the treasure existed. Skeptics argued the images showed nothing but rocks, shadows, and pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns in random shapes. The severed hand was probably a piece of wood. The chests were likely collapsed platform timbers. The debate raged, with neither side able to prove their interpretation. But the photographs accomplished something important. They renewed public interest in Oak Island. By 1980, the mystery was back in popular consciousness. Books analyzed the photographs. Television documentaries examined the evidence. New theories emerged, each more elaborate than the last. The 1980s saw several small-scale expeditions, all ultimately unsuccessful. The pattern was always the same. Initial optimism, difficult excavation, flooding problems, financial exhaustion, abandonment. Oak Island had defeated every attempt for nearly 200 years. Why would the 1980s be different? During this period, another phenomenon emerged. Oak Island attracted conspiracy theorists, people who believed the treasure was connected to vast historical conspiracies. Some claimed the Freemasons were still protecting the island, sabotaging excavation attempts. Others insisted government agencies were secretly working on Oak Island at night, recovering artifacts while preventing public discovery. A few believed the treasure was extraterrestrial in origin, left by ancient aliens visiting Earth. Most of these theories were easily dismissed, but a few contained intriguing elements. One researcher named Mark Finnan claimed to have discovered evidence of modern excavation on Oak Island during the 1950s. He found documents suggesting a classified U.S. military operation had occurred on the island in 1953, shortly after Stalin's death. Finnan theorized the operation was searching for Soviet intelligence documents hidden during World War II, when German U-boats had operated in North Atlantic waters. The theory was fantastical, but contained just enough historical truth to be difficult to refute completely. German submarines did operate near Nova Scotia during World War II. Soviet intelligence operations in North America were extensive, and classified military operations frequently involved unexplained activities. Could Oak Island have been used as a dead-drop location during the Cold War? Finnan thought so. Most historians disagreed. As the century drew to a close, Oak Island seemed destined to remain unsolved. David Tobias continued maintaining the site but conducted no major excavations. Tourism increased slightly, with the island's owners offering guided tours of historical excavation sites. The money pit remained flooded, its secrets intact. 7 people had died. Millions of dollars had been spent, yet the mystery endured, as impenetrable as ever. In 1999, a final incident occurred that would bridge Oak Island's past to its technological future. A film crew documenting the island for a Canadian television program reported equipment malfunctions. Cameras failed repeatedly. Audio recorders captured strange sounds, deep rumbling, metallic clanging that nobody on site heard directly. The crew abandoned filming after 3 days, spooked by what they couldn't explain. The century ended with Oak Island still silent, still mysterious, still waiting for technology, luck, or revelation to finally expose what lay beneath its soil. The 7 deaths had been paid, the prophecy fulfilled, but the treasure, if it existed, remained hidden, protected by water, earth, engineering, and perhaps something else. Something that didn't want to be found. The 21st century arrived with a promise. Technology would finally solve Oak Island. Satellites could see through Earth. Ground-penetrating radar could map underground structures with precision. 3D modeling software could reconstruct buried chambers digitally. Surely, with these tools, the mystery that had defeated 2 centuries of treasure hunters would yield its secrets. In 2006, 2 brothers from Michigan changed everything. Rick and Marty Lagina had been obsessed with Oak Island since childhood, when they'd read about the mystery in Reader's Digest. Rick was the romantic, driven by adventure and history. Marty was the pragmatist, a successful energy businessman who understood engineering and financing. Together, they formed a partnership that would bring Oak Island into the modern era. The Lagina brothers didn't rush into excavation. They spent years studying previous attempts, consulting with engineers, and developing a systematic approach. They understood that brute force had failed repeatedly. They needed strategy, technology, and patience. In 2007, they purchased a significant stake in Oak Island Tours, Inc., the company controlling the island. By 2010, they'd secured full excavation rights and began planning their assault on the money pit. But first, they needed funding. Excavation with modern technology was expensive. Industrial pumps, professional dive teams, ground-penetrating radar surveys, laboratory analysis of artifacts would easily exceed several $1 million. The Laginas approached the History Channel with a proposal: document their treasure hunt as a television series. The network agreed. In 2014, The Curse of Oak Island premiered. The show transformed Oak Island from obscure legend to international phenomenon. Millions of viewers watched the Laginas and their team excavate, theorize, and occasionally find tantalizing artifacts. The series presented Oak Island not as definitive treasure hunt, but as ongoing investigation. Each episode raised questions. Few provided answers. That ambiguity, frustrating to some viewers, accurately reflected Oak Island's reality. This wasn't a mystery with a clear solution. It was an archaeological puzzle missing half its pieces. The Laginas brought genuinely impressive technology. Sonic drilling rigs capable of penetrating 200 feet while extracting intact core samples. Magnetometer surveys detecting metal objects buried at depth. LiDAR mapping creating detailed 3-dimensional models of the island's surface and subsurface. Dye tests tracking water flow through underground channels. Remote-operated vehicles exploring flooded shafts with high-definition cameras. Early results were promising. In 2015, a diver exploring Shaft 10X, a deep excavation dug in the 1970s, reported seeing what appeared to be a hand-carved chamber at approximately 170 feet. The chamber's walls showed tool marks, suggesting human construction. But visibility was so poor, and the danger so great, that comprehensive exploration was impossible. The chamber remained documented, but unexplained. In 2016, the team made their first significant discovery. While excavating Smith's Cove, they found fragments of a wooden structure dated through dendrochronology to approximately 1769. This was crucial. It confirmed that significant human activity occurred on Oak Island in the late 18th century, shortly before Daniel McGuinness's 1795 discovery. Someone had built something substantial around 1769. What they built remained unclear. But at least one element of Oak Island's story was now historically verified. The same excavation uncovered a lead cross, small and crudely made, buried several feet below the beach. The cross's design was simple but unusual, featuring a loop at the top, similar to Egyptian ankhs or early Celtic Christian symbols. Lead isotope analysis suggested European origin, possibly Spanish or French. Radiocarbon dating was inconclusive, placing the cross's manufacture anywhere between 1500 and 1800. Was this a Templar artifact, a French military marker, or a modern planting by someone hoping to perpetuate the mystery? Critics argued the cross proved nothing. Lead objects were common throughout history. Finding one buried on Oak Island didn't confirm treasure or Templars. Supporters countered that finding any European artifact from before 1795 was significant. It demonstrated that Oak Island wasn't pristine wilderness when McGuinness arrived. People had been there, doing something important enough to leave artifacts behind. In 2017, the Leginas focused on the money pit itself. They drove a massive steel caisson, essentially a giant tube, down through the flooded shaft. The caisson would protect against collapse while allowing excavation inside. This technique had been proposed since the 1800s but never attempted at this scale. The modern caisson was 6 feet in diameter, made of 1/4-inch steel, and could be driven to depths exceeding 150 feet. As the caisson descended, removing soil from inside it, the team discovered layer after layer of material, wood fragments at various depths, pieces of pottery, metal scraps, leather fragments. Each layer was documented, photographed, and sent for analysis. The material came from multiple time periods. Some were dated to the 1700s. Other fragments were Vicnaira from 1800s excavation attempts. Still other materials were modern. Contamination from 20th century activities. This mixing of materials was frustrating but informative. It proved that previous excavations had thoroughly disturbed the money pit. The original structure, whatever it was, had been compromised by 2 centuries of digging. Finding intact treasure chambers was now unlikely. But perhaps they could still find artifacts that explained the site's purpose. At 90 feet, the caisson extracted a piece of worked wood showing clear axe marks. Carbon dating placed it between 1655 and 1695. This was earlier than the 1769 structure at Smith's Cove. It suggested at least 2 phases of construction on Oak Island. Something in the mid-1600s, something else in the late 1700s. Were these connected? Were they completely separate activities? The questions multiplied. The team also discovered parchment fragments at various depths. Chemical analysis showed the parchment was high quality, the kind used for important documents rather than everyday writing. But the fragments were too small and degraded to read. Whatever documents existed had been destroyed by water, pressure, and time. If the money pit once contained valuable papers explaining its purpose, those papers were now just unreadable scraps. By 2018, the Laginas had spent over $5 million and made dozens of discoveries. But they hadn't found treasure. They hadn't solved the mystery. What they'd found was evidence that human activity on Oak Island was more extensive and more ancient than previously documented. Evidence that multiple groups had worked on the island across centuries. Evidence that something significant had occurred here, even if that something remained frustratingly unclear. Modern geophysical surveys revealed something stunning. The underground anomalies weren't limited to the money pit area. Using advanced radar and seismic imaging, researchers detected structures across the entire eastern end of the island. Linear features that might be tunnels, void spaces that could be chambers, areas of disturbed soil suggesting excavation. Whatever happened on Oak Island wasn't a single shaft dug by pirates. It was a major engineering project, involving multiple excavations across a wide area. One theory gaining traction involved salt mining. Oak Island sits atop anhydrite deposits, a mineral used in salt production. What if the money pit wasn't a treasure vault, but an abandoned salt mine? The flood tunnels could be drainage systems for removing groundwater. The wooden platforms could be structural supports. The coconut fiber might be packing material for extracted salt. This theory explained much of the site's engineering without requiring treasure at all. But the salt mine theory had problems. Salt operations required surface infrastructure buildings, roads, docks for shipping. No archaeological evidence of such infrastructure existed. Moreover, salt mining in the 1700s was well documented. If Oak Island had been a salt operation, records would exist. None did. The site appeared in no commercial documents, no shipping manifests, no tax records. Whatever happened on Oak Island, it wasn't legitimate commercial activity in 2019. The team made, perhaps, their most intriguing discovery. While drilling in an area called the Swamp, they found a ship's wharf buried beneath centuries of sediment. Dendrochronology dated the wooden posts to the 1790s. This proved that ships docked at Oak Island around the time of McGuinness's discovery. Someone was moving cargo to or from the island during the exact period when the money pit was allegedly active. The swamp itself appeared to be artificial. Sonar imaging suggested it was originally a cove, later filled in deliberately. Why would anyone fill a natural harbor? Unless they wanted to hide something beneath it. The team began excavating the swamp, finding more wooden structures, ships, spikes, and even fragments of ancient pottery. The swamp was becoming as interesting as the money pit itself. By 2020, The Curse of Oak Island had aired over 100 episodes. The show was History Channel's highest-rated series. Millions of viewers followed each season, hoping for breakthrough discoveries. The Laginas had become unlikely celebrities, recognized worldwide for their Oak Island work. But they hadn't found treasure. Critics mocked the show as endless speculation and empty holes. Supporters argued that archaeology took time, that understanding Oak Island required patience and systematic investigation. The COVID-19 pandemic forced suspension of 2020 excavations. When work resumed in 2021, the team employed even more advanced technology. Muon detectors, originally developed for particle physics, could theoretically detect void spaces deep underground by measuring cosmic ray penetration. Applied to Oak Island, muon detection might reveal hidden chambers that other methods missed. The muon surveys detected something. At approximately 200 feet depth, beneath the money pit area, the detectors indicated a large anomaly, a space where density was lower than surrounding rock, either a natural cave or an artificial chamber. The team planned drilling to investigate, but the depth posed enormous challenges. 200 feet was deeper than any previous successful excavation. The pressure, the flooding, the danger all increased dramatically at that depth. As of 2023, excavation continues. The Leginas and their team work each summer, systematically exploring the island. They've found artifacts. They've discovered structures. They've documented evidence of extensive human activities spanning centuries. But they haven't found treasure. They haven't uncovered documents explaining the site's purpose. They haven't solved the mystery. What they have done is transform Oak Island from legend into legitimate archaeological site. Universities now study their findings. Peer-reviewed papers analyze artifacts. Museums display recovered objects. Oak Island is no longer just a treasure hunt. It's a historical investigation with genuine scientific value. But the central question remains unanswered. What is buried on Oak Island? The evidence suggests something significant. The engineering complexity, the multiple construction phases, the international materials like coconut fiber and Mediterranean cement all point to a major project with substantial backing. Yet no records explain it. No historical documents acknowledge it. It's as if someone deliberately erased all evidence of what happened there. Perhaps that erasure was intentional. Perhaps whoever buried something on Oak Island also destroyed all documentation, ensuring the secret died with them. If true, modern technology might never solve this mystery, because the answer isn't buried beneath the island. It was destroyed centuries ago, burned or sunk or otherwise eliminated by people who understood that some secrets must remain absolutely hidden. Or perhaps the real treasure of Oak Island isn't gold or silver. Perhaps it's the search itself. The mystery that brings together engineers, historians, adventurers, and dreamers. The question that has no answer, forcing us to imagine, to theorize, to explore. Maybe Oak Island's greatest treasure is the human obsession it generates. The drive to solve unsolvable puzzles. The refusal to accept that some questions have no answers. The island waits, as it has waited for 2 centuries. Technology advances. Methods improve. Each generation brings new tools, new theories, new hope. And each generation, ultimately, faces the same result. Discovery without revelation. Evidence without explanation. The mystery endures. Dawn breaks over Mahone Bay. The water is glasscome, reflecting perfect mirror images of islands scattered across its surface. Oak Island sits among them, distinguished now by equipment, vehicles, and the infrastructure of ongoing excavation. But from this distance, in this early morning light, it looks almost peaceful, almost innocent, as if 228 years of obsession, death, and mystery never happened. But they did happen. 6 confirmed deaths, possibly 7 more disappearances, fortunes spent and lost, families torn apart, lives consumed by an island that refuses to yield its secret. What drives this obsession? What makes Oak Island different from countless other treasure legends that fade into obscurity? Perhaps the answer lies not in what's buried, but in what the search represents. Dr. Sarah Michaels, an archaeologist who's consulted with the Lagina team since 2016, stands on Oak Island's eastern shore, watching the sunrise. She's 53 years old, has a distinguished career studying colonial-era sites across North America, and she's spent 7 years trying to understand this place. Not just what's buried here, but why it matters so deeply to so many people. Oak Island is a mirror, she says, her voice quiet in the morning stillness. People see in it whatever they most want to find. If you believe in pirate treasure, you see evidence of pirates. If you believe in Templars, you find Templar connections. If you want to believe in ancient mysteries, Oak Island provides them. The island reflects our desires back at us. But Dr. Michaels believes there's something real here. The engineering is undeniable. The artifacts are genuine. Someone did something significant on this island, probably in the mid to late 1700s. The question is what? And why all evidence of that activity was so thoroughly erased from historical records. Her theory, developed after years of research, is controversial. She doesn't believe Oak Island contains treasure in the traditional sense. No pirate gold, no Templar wealth, no royal jewels. Instead, she thinks Oak Island was an archive, a repository for documents, papers that someone needed hidden but preserved, information so sensitive that it required the most elaborate protection system the 18th century could devise. What information? Dr. Michaels has several possibilities. One involves French military intelligence during the 7 Years' War. France conducted extensive espionage operations against British forces in North America. If French intelligence gathered information about British military capabilities, political corruption, or colonial vulnerabilities, that intelligence might have been too valuable to destroy but too dangerous to keep in accessible locations. Oak Island could have been an intelligence vault, designed to protect French secrets until they could be safely retrieved. But France lost the war in 1763. British forces captured French territories across North America. If Oak Island contained French intelligence, France never recovered it. And Britain, if they learned of Oak Island's existence, might have tried to access it themselves. Perhaps some of the 19th century excavation companies weren't independent treasure hunters. Perhaps they were British-backed operations, attempting to recover French secrets that could still prove embarrassing or valuable decades later. Another theory involves the American Revolution. The war began in 1775, just 20 years before McGinnis discovered the money pit. What if American revolutionaries, British loyalists, or French supporters of independence used Oak Island to hide sensitive documents, military plans, financial records, lists of spies and sympathizers, information that, if discovered by opposing forces, could destroy lives and alter history? This theory explains why the money pit appeared recently disturbed when McGinnis found it in 1795. Perhaps someone had accessed it recently, adding or removing documents related to the just concluded revolution. The tackle block hanging from the oak tree was old, suggesting the original construction occurred decades earlier. But the soil's loose condition indicated recent activity. Perhaps Oak Island was an active archive, accessed periodically by people who knew how to bypass the flood trap. But Dr. Michaels's most intriguing theory involves something rarely considered: private wealth protection during the Age of Revolution. Between 1765 and 1800, revolutionary movements swept across the Atlantic world. American Revolution, French Revolution, Haitian Revolution. Aristocratic and merchant families saw their wealth confiscated, their properties seized, their lives destroyed. Many looked for ways to preserve assets beyond reach of revolutionary governments. What if Oak Island was built by or for a wealthy family seeking to protect their fortune, not from pirates, but from revolutionaries? They would need a location outside revolutionary territories. Nova Scotia, under stable British control, was perfect. They would need elaborate security to prevent theft. The flood trap provided that, and they would need absolute secrecy to avoid attracting attention from authorities or criminals. The lack of historical records suggests they achieved that secrecy. This theory explains several mysteries. It explains why construction materials came from multiple locations: Mediterranean cement, Caribbean coconut fiber, European tools. A wealthy international family would have access to materials from their various properties. It explains why the engineering was so sophisticated. Wealthy families could hire the best engineers. It explains why no records exist. Wealthy families hiding assets from revolutionary governments would destroy all documentation. And it explains why the treasure was never recovered. If the family was destroyed by revolution, executed or scattered, knowledge of Oak Island died with them. Their wealth remained buried, protected by a security system nobody else could bypass. Oak Island became an unintentional time capsule, preserving 18th century wealth for future generations who would never claim it. But these are theories, educated guesses based on evidence and historical context. The truth remains elusive. After 2 centuries of investigation, employing technology the original builders couldn't have imagined, Oak Island keeps its secret. Maybe that's the point. Maybe some secrets are meant to remain secret, not because of curses or supernatural protection, but because the truth is less important than the search. Oak Island has generated more economic activity through tourism and television than any treasure could provide. It's created jobs, funded research, inspired books and documentaries. The mystery itself is more valuable than any buried gold. Rick Lagina, now in his 70s, has spent nearly 2 decades working on Oak Island. He's invested millions of dollars, thousands of hours, and immeasurable emotional energy. Has it been worth it? He's asked this question constantly. His answer never changes, every single day. Not because he's found treasure. He hasn't. But because the search has given his life meaning. It's connected him to history. It's challenged him intellectually. It's brought together a team of talented people pursuing a common goal. The journey for Rick Lagina has been the treasure. Every artifact discovered, every theory explored, every mystery deepened. These are the rewards. Not gold, but knowledge. Not wealth, but purpose. His brother Marty sees it differently. Marty is the engineer, the businessman, the pragmatist. For Marty, Oak Island is a puzzle that should have a solution. The fact that they haven't solved it frustrates him. But even Marty admits the search has value beyond treasure. It's taught him humility. It's shown him that human ingenuity in the 1700s was far greater than modern people usually credit. It's reminded him that history contains more mysteries than answers. As excavation continues into the 2020s, the team makes occasional discoveries. A coin dated 1652, fragments of books, pieces of jewelry. Each artifact adds a small piece to the puzzle. Each one raises more questions than it answers. The mystery deepens rather than resolves, and perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps mysteries exist not to be solved, but to remind us of how much we don't know. We live in an age that claims certainty about everything. We have answers at our fingertips, explanations for every phenomenon, data for every question. Yet here stands Oak Island, defying explanation, resisting our technology, remaining mysterious despite our best efforts. There's something humbling about that, something that forces us to acknowledge the limits of our knowledge, the boundaries of our understanding, the persistence of the unknown. In 2023, ground-penetrating radar detected another anomaly, deeper than any previous discovery. At approximately 240 feet, sensors indicated a large void, a chamber, perhaps the original vault that all earlier excavations missed, perhaps a natural cave, perhaps nothing at all, just an artifact of measurement error. The team debates whether to excavate. The depth is extreme. The danger is real. The cost is enormous. And the probability of finding anything after 2 centuries of disturbance is low. But the possibility exists. The chance, however small, that they might finally answer the question that has consumed this island for over 200 years. They decide to drill. One more attempt. One more push toward truth. Because that's what Oak Island demands. It demands persistence. It demands hope against hope. It demands belief that mysteries can be solved if only we try hard enough. Maybe they'll find something. Maybe the 240-foot anomaly contains the answer everyone seeks. Documents explaining the site's purpose. Artifacts proving who built it. Treasure that justifies 2 centuries of searching. Maybe, or maybe they'll find nothing. Another empty chamber. Another natural formation. Another dead end in a maze of dead ends. And the search will continue, because Oak Island isn't about reaching the end. It's about refusing to quit. It's about maintaining hope in the face of repeated failure. It's about believing that truth exists. Even when truth remains hidden, the sun rises fully now, burning off morning mist. Oak Island emerges clearly in the light. Trees, beaches, equipment, and beneath it all, somewhere in the darkness underground, a secret, a mystery, a question without answer. Tourists will visit today, some seeking adventure, others seeking history, a few genuinely hoping the mystery might be solved during their visit. They'll walk the island's trails, see the excavation sites, hear the stories. Most will leave entertained but unchanged. A few will leave obsessed, minds captured by the same mystery that captured Daniel McGuinness in 1795. And that's Oak Island's true treasure. Not gold or silver or jewels, but the ability to inspire, to make people dream, to make them believe in mysteries, to make them hope that somewhere, somehow, answers exist waiting to be found. In an age of instant information and immediate gratification, Oak Island offers something different. It offers a mystery that can't be Googled, a question that can't be answered in a 30-second video, a story that requires patience, thought, and imagination. Perhaps that's what we really need. Not another treasure hunt, but a reminder that some things can't be easily understood. That some mysteries require lifelong dedication, that some secrets might remain secret forever. The wind picks up, moving through oak and spruce trees. Leaves rustle, waves lap against the shore. Equipment sits silent, waiting for workers to arrive and resume their endless search. The money pit, now reinforced with modern materials, sits patient and flooded, just as it sat for over 2 centuries. just as it might sit for centuries more, because maybe Oak Island's secret isn't meant to be found. Maybe it's meant to be searched for. Maybe the island's true purpose is reminding us that mystery still exists in our mapped, measured, explained world. That wonder still has a place. That some questions are more valuable than answers, Daniel. McGinnis saw a light on Oak Island in 1795. That light has been burning ever since. Not a physical light, but the light of curiosity, of hope, of human determination to understand the unknown. That light will continue burning long after current treasure hunters are gone. It will burn until the secret is finally revealed, or until the last human who cares about Oak Island's mystery finally gives up. And based on 228 years of history, that second possibility seems unlikely, because Oak Island doesn't attract quitters. It attracts believers. People who see a flooded pit and imagine treasure, who see failure and imagine eventual success, who see mystery and imagine revelation. Those people will keep searching, generation after generation, century after century, until finally, perhaps, the island yields its secret. Or perhaps not. Perhaps Oak Island will remain mysterious forever, its true treasure not buried beneath the ground but living in the hearts of those who refuse to stop searching. The sun climbs higher. Another day begins on Oak Island. Another day of searching. Another day of hope. Another day of mystery. And that, ultimately, is the real treasure.